Hello for the fifth week of Easter. Using the first and third reading, Acts 6, 1-7, and John 14, 1-12. Jesus tells his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." It applies to us today as well as in the early church. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Have faith in God and have faith in me, he says. The early church certainly wasn't just perfect, It certainly wasn't hunky-dory all the time. Sometimes we think it was, but it wasn't. All you do is look in today's first reading from the Acts of the Apostles, and the Greek-speaking Jews were not happy campers. The Greek-speaking Jews were complaining to the Hebrew-speaking Jews that their widows were not getting a fair share in the food and the distribution of things in the community. And we better do something about it. And they did. They appointed 7 new Greek-speaking Jews to help rectify the situation. Sort of interesting because that, in the Acts of the Apostles, we think is the beginning of the whole concept of deacons in the early church. This is many years after Christ left, Deacons, or maybe even deaconesses. Here the 7 names are all Greek names for these Greek-speaking Jews. So Jesus earlier, he told his disciples, "I believe in you," and he left. And he left the church to carry on, produce, and adjust. Then, today is no real big difference. The church has problems and troubles. Just look in the last 50, 60 years, The church 50, 60 years ago, the Pope thought that we're not adjusting, we Catholics, our church, to the modern world. John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, says we need to get together and talk about it. And he begins the Second Vatican Council. And then he dies, and then JP2, Saint JP2, or Saint John Paul II, he tries, in the first half of his term, he tries to innovate and bring all this about. I found that exciting, but the last half of his situation, or being in power, he sort of calms it down and puts on the skids. And church continues to try to improve, but the church needs to improve and change continually. And now, we have Francis. And he's trying to renovate or tidy up or address some of the problems and the troubles in the church. We're not finished with the sex abuse. We're certainly not finished with the Vatican Bank tactics. And we're not finished with our government, the Curia. We are still renovating our house or our home. So don't be too troubled, says Jesus in the early church. Don't be too troubled in today's church, I'm sure he would say as well. That gospel, Jesus compares us to sort of a house or a home. And what we do within the home. In the home we share meals, At least I grew up sharing meals. Maybe we don't do it as much as we used to, but we still eat together. And there's all kinds of comfort and belonging in a good home. And there's also all kinds of tension and rancor and fighting in a good home. And the church is like a good home, and sometimes a bad home. The church is a house full of wounded people who are suffering, but it's also a house full of good people who have a heck of a lot of fun and joy and insight into life. And so the church is a house or a home in a continuous renovation. And by golly, it's a big house. It's a big home with big joy and big problems. So in a sense, don't get too uptight if the church seems like it's a mess. One day, these are the words or the vision of Jesus, one day it will be a perfect home, a perfect house in God's kingdom. And in God's house, there will be many rooms, perfect rooms, or perfect dwelling places, where there will be joy and not the mess. In the meantime, Jesus says, don't lose heart. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Have faith in God and faith in me. When we look back in history to the early church, when we look back the last 50, 60 years, and we look at today's church, don't lose heart. And don't give up. And don't expect everything to be perfectly, but work toward it. In this life, we work toward that. We practice for. We believe in the future, but we don't just live in the future, we live in the present with all the imperfections and with all the problems that a house has or a home has. So I find this gospel very warm, the perfect dwelling place, that he's going to go into his Father's house and prepare for us, so that when we die and go or leave this life, we'll be part of that perfect home. I can understand why this gospel reading is one of the most chosen gospel readings for funerals. Because grandma or dad or mom or my son or my daughter or my friend is in that process now. We are not. So even though things are tough sometimes, don't give up. Don't let your hearts be too troubled. Don't give up, but have faith in God and have faith in Jesus. Have a good day.